So I was honestly expecting to record this earlier than I have done, but to be fair, lighting issues wait for no man. And as a product of submarines and someone who was doing his training for the nuclear navy, I thought Jimmy Carter, if anyone's going to understand, if anyone is going to understand, wanting to wait till you have appropriate electrical power going and everything functioning correctly in terms of lighting, it's going to be a Submariner. So Jimmy Carter. Why are we doing him this year of leadership? Well, because it was either a case of ignoring the only American president who has been a Submariner, or talking incessantly about him. And whereas Kennedy will probably demand a live at some point someday, because there have already been suggestions which have come close in the voting, Jimmy Carter is not the type to get that. And I can understand why. For a long time, he was pretty much considered a bit of a meh president, an excellent former president, and his legacy is, for some, divisive. I would say, the more I've studied him over the years, the more I have felt he did his best with the information he had at the time. He may have made different decisions with different information, but he did his best. And I think as we go through this video, you'll understand why I have linked his time in the Navy to time in the White House. Because, to me, Jimmy Carter personifies the can-do attitude of navies. And the Royal Navy put it as a can-do attitude. Other navies have different descriptions for it, but it's all pretty much the same. It's a can-do attitude. They will achieve, they will overcome, they will succeed. Jimmy Carter's main thing was he would look for someone else to do it first. And if he couldn't find someone who he thought was going to do a good job, he'd have a go at doing it himself. And he might not do a great job, but he'd try his best. And I respect that. I honestly do. Admittedly, I found myself in a similar situation. I have once or twice uttered the words, I may not want to do this job, but damn me if no one else here is actually remotely capable of doing it, so I'd better do it. And that sounds big-headed. It really does, but think about your own life. Think about some of the situations you've been in. And think about some of the times where the people who could have done the job okay didn't step up and take responsibility, and the person who was left in charge was frankly useless and made it worse. That happens. That happens in leadership far more often than we'd like to think. So Jimmy Carter is that kind of leader. He's not really going out looking for it. And actually seems to be quite a content soul. But he is the type who's going to see a need, see a gap, and going to look first for others, and then seeing no one else who is capable of doing it to at least the level he could do it himself, putting himself in the ring and going for it. Now you see this when you look through his entire career, because when you look at him, he really shouldn't have been president. No one with these qualifications had a lot of funding behind him, a lot of should have made it. He really shouldn't have. In fact, he almost screams, if he does get the president, one-term president, which he was. He was a one-term president. He lived just a little over 100 years. He was active in the US Navy from 1946 to 1953, joining just too late for World War II. And despite serving in both the Atlantic and Pacific fleets, because he was a submariner, he didn't get any involvement in Korea. When he leaves the Navy in 1953, he becomes a reservist. He goes off famously to become a peanut farmer. Why? Because his dad dies. And because no one else is going to take over the family farm. So he steps up, because there's no other option. And the family farm is not really a great concern. Honestly, from a financial perspective, he would have been better staying in the Navy. Yes, I don't think he has the makings, from the write-ups of him, of going to be a stellar career. I don't see him becoming a 4-star admiral or something like that. But I do think he has the makings of becoming a decent captain. And on the face of it at that point, that's a far better career option than the peanut farm. But he goes and does it, because someone has to. And again, this is part of his naval styling and his whole ethos, realistically. And then it's similar, he becomes Georgia State Senate. Why does he run for that? Mostly because he really doesn't like the idea of the other guy who might run for it. And he sees him as a really, really bad Democrat. And so he runs for it instead. And it's similar with the governor of Georgia. In fact, I think it might have been the same guy. He sees him going for the governorship. He had been thinking the guy was going to announce that he was going to go for the United States Senate. So he was preparing a Senate run to counter him. And then he finds out the guy is going for governorship, because the guy had hoped that he could bait and switch Jimmy. And then Jimmy goes, no, I'll stand for the governor of Georgia. And he wins again. And he ends up running for president of the United States. And winning. And let's be honest, that's no mean feat, because at the time when he's making the decisions of who to run and, what to do, we're talking Gerald Ford is in office. Gerald Ford. And honestly, Ford, who was a liberal Republican, especially by modern standards, if you look at his positioning on equal rights, abortion, and all sorts of things, was probably defeated most by the television debates. Because he blundered. And Carter didn't. In many ways, Carter gets the nomination because all the big beasts are going, we can't win this year, we won't, so we won't go. And Carter looks around and goes, who are you letting, so you all think you're going to lose, so no one actually decent wants to run? Well, then I will run. It's the story of Carter's entire career, entire life. Is he looks first for someone else to support, for someone to assist, who's going to do a great job. When he can't find them, he looks for someone who's going to do a good job. And if he can't find them, he looks at the options and decides if it's only him that can, him that's standing at the left, and none of the ones will do an adequate job, or even actually preferably a decent job, he'll go and do it himself. That is what Carter is. And that explains so much of his presidency. Because he doesn't come in with a whole list of things he really, really wants to do to change the world. He's coming there because it needs someone to be doing it who's going to do it with the right ethics, morals, the right weight of responsibility for the role, in his opinion. It's a really interesting thing. I've read quite a few presidential autobiographies and biographies over the years, because one of the joys of being a naval historian is that you often have to understand the rules of engagement which have been set in place. And part of understanding the rules of engagement is understand the people who signed off on those rules of engagement, and trying to read about them and how their phrasing, how their mentality works. And his was the only presidential biography which seemed to care more about the responsibility of being president than what he could do as president. which might sound like two sides of the same coin, but it's a bit different. It is a bit different. With that being said, let's start really looking at his naval career and burrowing down on that. Now, why did Carter join the Navy? Why did he need to join the Navy? Let's be honest, he comes from a farming family. He's at Georgia School of Technology, and he's doing well. He'll graduate with a Bachelor of Science degree in 1946. Well, there's three good reasons. One, a gentleman called Blake Van Leer encourages him to join the Navy as he thinks it would be suitable for him and would help him grow his leadership skills and his natural tendency to be interested in things. Two, he long had a desire to join the Navy and see the world. And three, just after he graduates in 1946 from Georgia School of Technology, modern Georgia Tech, he gets married. He met one of his sister's friends, the lovely young Rosalind Smith, and looks at her and goes, "You're it for me." Lucky sod. And you need a career. If you're married and you've got a family coming along and all these things, you need to be earning money. You need a career which starts paying immediately and which gives you good prospects. And the Navy looked like good options, and this is a good option. And as said, when he joins the Navy, he does pretty darn well. He's a fairly good sprint football player. He's a fairly good cross-country runner, and that's how he keeps fit, and honestly, his build does explain that. And he manages to graduate 60th out of 821 midshipmen in 1947. That's pretty good. Commissioned as an ensign. And he immediately starts training for submarines. That's what he wants to do. That's what he wants to be. He wants to be a submariner. And why has he picked that? Well, because, believe it or not, there is one ongoing reality of the submarine service. There are never enough people applying for the posts. They can offer money, they can offer all sorts of things, but the thing is, not many people, when they're thinking about joining the Navy, are thinking about going around the world under the sea. Believe it or not, a vast majority of people joining navies do not think, I want to go around the world underwater and not be able to see the world. Well, he does. He looks at it and goes, there is a vacancy there. They're having trouble. And I'm good. I'm good at science. I'm good at engineering. I can do that. Which is actually kind of par for the course of submarine officers. The amount of people I've met who've gone into submarine service, not because they first joined up wanting to do it, but because when they got in there, they're looking at it going, they need good people there and no one else seems to be going for it. It really isn't the thing that they go in for the extra money, although that probably does help make it worthwhile. That probably does help keep them in the service, because let's be honest, again, it's quite smelly down there. But his first submarine to serve on was the USS Pomfret, a Barlow class, a good little boat. Now, Carter would serve aboard the Pomfret from the 17th of December 1948 to the 1st of February 1951, and during this time he'd be promoted to lieutenant, junior grade I think, and he would also take part in what were, how do I put this, war simulation patrols in the coasts of Japan and China, wandering around those areas. He developed quite a lot of experience doing this, but in 1950 she goes to San Diego. She then operates along the United States West Coast until February 1951, when of course he leaves. And then she goes off to take part in some Korean War operations just after he's left, which he did find a bit annoying. I have to admit, Jimmy Carter is one of those who finds that kind of annoying that it's taking place just after he's gone. And of his time aboard this vessel, what can we say? Well, if he'd been a Royal Naval officer, he'd probably been described as solid. From the most information we can get, which is not full of a load of bump, because people like to, moment you've become president or prime minister or anything of celebrity status or anything like that, suddenly people like to pad their meetings with you. Every conversation you had was a 20-minute soliloquy about something or other. And that's nothing new, by the way. That's been going on for a long, long time. What we seem to get, once you look at it realistically, he is considered a solid officer. He's definitely in line to make the captain. That seems to be where he's sort of heading up. I think he could have maybe gone a little bit higher, but again, captain's probably where he's going to go if you could look at the pace of his career, the development of his career, and the postings. He's not... In this period, if you're going to go for senior rank, you need to spend a lot more time as a staff officer, and he likes being an operational officer far too much to do that. Later on in 1951, he's assigned to the USS K-1, SSK-1, aka the Barracuda. And she's a special boat, but we'll talk about her after the shameless book plug. Now, why am I doing Jimmy Carter, and why is this not going to be a particularly long video? It's probably going to be maximum of half an hour. Well, maybe a little bit longer, but probably maximum half an hour. Jimmy Carter is interesting, and I like to look at people who take their skills in one area and apply them to another area. And I like people who live up to the ethos they work with. I don't agree with the idea that some people do is try and make Jimmy Carter or other people into saints. They're not. But Carter is certainly someone who used the status of his former position, his experience and understanding of the world, to try and do the best he could. And I like that about someone. I don't have to agree with everything someone says or does to like them. That might be a controversial opinion to take in the modern world, especially when you consider some of the purity tests that seem to appear in Twitter, but also, or rather X as it is now called, especially in Facebook, and even sometimes in the YouTube comment section. The amount of times I see people tell me I'm not a real conservative because I support the NHS in the UK, and I go, it makes sense in the British situation. It really does. To have a nationalised healthcare system, it makes sense for the UK. It fits our system and our needs. Get over it. People are allowed to be different. I think that's the thing I wanted to really talk about today. And yeah, the shameless book plug is usually part of it, where I go, there are more books coming. There are. I've had to spend a lot of time on the phone to BT and other organisations recently to sort out stuff, and that's hopefully going to be going through soon. And then I've got my talk up in London next week. All those things are fun. But yeah, and then I've got the Historiathon, and then I've got the competition results video, and then the competition announcement video, and then I've got the book coming out, hopefully in time for Christmas. I say hopefully in time for Christmas. That is the plan. It'll come out in as if I've got all the... I'm doing it all myself, so if I forgot all the editing, upload, everything right on on Amazon, and I do. Anyone who's got recommendations for good software, I have got to purchase the software soon to do the finalist thing. I've been testing out with free software models, but anyone who's got good recommendations for what software to run on a PC, not a Mac. I'm not buying a Mac. Literally, just edit a Kindle book. I'm open to suggestions. But there are a couple pieces of software which I'm working with, which seem to be doing a fairly good job. And I'm going to buy one of them, the actual proper version of it. But realistically, that's all coming. That's all coming. And the Kindle publishing will be both Kindle as in download, ebook, and I'm hoping to get it through and go through the extra hoops with Amazon to allow them to do Kindle Direct Publishing, where they print it to order for those people who want a printed copy. I'm very interested to see how this works out, because if it works out well and this provides a model for me going forward to publish and fund research on the sort of the book scale, as well as YouTube videos, it'll be an interesting scenario to have. It will be, and it'll probably make my life a lot more sensible. A lot more sensible. So thank you for making all this possible. Still can't believe last year in last year's Historython we fundraised the money for me to buy the first batch of photos from the IWM. Literally 2 photos. Once we got through all the costing of it, it's literally 2 photos. Think about all the money, all the effort we put in last year for this Historython, and that's what it raised. But this year we're doing an even bigger Historython. This year it's going to be for charity as well as for me, so yeah, it's good. Or rather, for charity and for the channel and the historical research. Which, honestly, yes, if I'm being honest, the other 2 are for me, aren't they? So I should just leave it as for me, but, you know. It also feels a bit weird, because, yeah. Thank you for your support. Thank you for making it all possible. So why was Carter selected for the Barracuda? Well, the Barracuda is actually laid down in July 1949 and launched in March 1951 and commissioned in November 1951. Carter was part of the commissioning crew. He's actually technically part of its pre-commissioning crew and the crew during the crew that then commissions it. He joins it before she even commissions. And he's not reassigned from her till October 1952. He joins her almost as soon as he leaves the Pomfret. And so he goes straight from the Pomfret to the Barracuda, pretty much. And she's equipped with the BQR-4 bow-mounted sonar array. That's what this massive thing is. It always sticks on people looking and going, what? And she's an interesting development point in American submarine history. She's a really interesting class of boat. And it's when you realise that the Barracuda class are not quite the last SSKs that the USN produce. Not quite the last. But it is part of a dying breed. Literally, it is the Tangs and the Greybacks which come after that. So the Barracuda class, which are free boats, are succeeded by the 6 Tangs and the 2 Greybacks. She's part of a dying breed, but she's still an important development point. She's still an important evolution, and it's important for them to understand and test her. Now, while he's involved in doing this for the Barracuda, he catches the eye of someone. And when I say he catches the eye of someone, he catches the eye of someone who is scary to a lot of people. He's doing well, he's writing proper reports, he's providing lots of data, lots of interesting points. He's being a very good officer in terms of following exactly what he's being requested to do. and adapting to the situation, adapting to the technology of the situation, and pushing it forward. And he comes to the attention of Rickover. Now, the then, as he was, Captain Harmon G. Rickover, had pretty much just started the nuclear submarine program. And in 1952, Carter joined that program. He would later say that after his own parents, Rickover had the greatest influence on his life, which is a nice thing to say. Carter sent to the Naval Reactors Branch of the Atomic Energy Commission in Washington for 3 months duty, and then he is sent to go to Chalk River to study things there and assist in a shutdown of a reactor after there have been issues, and he does well there. Basically, Carter develops a bit of a reputation as being someone who the US Navy, who Rickover, who various people can trust when there's a situation and you need a safe pair of hands to go and run the situation. He will volunteer. He will come along. He will do it. And it's certainly for Carter, this experience, especially Chalk River Laboratories and the issues that had happened there, shaped a lot of Carter's opinions on atomic energy and his views on the danger of nuclear material. And I can understand that, because the closer you are to something, the more you understand the risks of something, and the more you can see what people could do if they didn't think. You can see the mistakes that can happen. One of the interesting things that we learnt when we were traveling around Japan was the safety record of the Shinkansen. And one of the things you start to notice that a lot of the train drivers, a lot of the people involved do, is they do this when they are checking things. They literally have their hand pointing at what they're checking. So they are consciously focusing on that position. And that's part of their safety procedures. Making sure they are consciously focusing on exactly what's going on. And when they're driving, sometimes if you're sitting behind a Japanese train driver, they don't move. You're worried they're dead. Now, why is this coming back to Carter? Why is this coming back to the nuclear program? Because when Carter's involved, they're still developing a lot of procedures to maintain safety. There are a lot of minor accidents, a lot of small accidents which build up to this. And this is the thing, if you have the experience at that sort of point, you can develop one of two reactions. You can develop faith in that we are adapting to the situation, we're learning from it, we're improving, we're becoming better. You can develop that kind of opinion. Or you can develop the opinion of, we keep having these little accidents, things are going to get bad very quickly because people aren't following a basic procedure. That's the experience. That's what can happen. That's the way people go often in these circumstances. However, after all this time ashore, he starts some more time ashore, a 6-month nuclear power plant operation course at Union College in Schenectady. Reads German, but I'm fairly sure the Americans probably pronounce it slightly different, in March 1953. His plan is to go and serve aboard the USS Seawolf, the second planned US nuclear submarine. Unfortunately, his father dies of pancreatic cancer in July. Think about that then. His association with the nuclear program had begun in 1952, had involved working at Naval Reactors Branch of the Atomic Energy Agency Commission in Washington, had involved helping clear up the atomic energy of Canada's Chalk River Laboratories accident, and had involved him taking part in all sorts of interesting things and starting to studies, but he never actually got to serve at sea because his father died of pancreatic cancer, and so he obtained a release from active duty to take over the family farm. There are a lot of family, including his own wife, who were slightly unhappy at this. It seemed a monumental step backwards. But they picked up, they carried on, and they developed. And from there, well, his farming and his later political careers all start to spring. And this is where we get into an interesting discussion. How does his time in Navy affect all this? Well, unsurprisingly, his approach to farming is education. One of the really interesting things is that Carter joins farming just as farming starts to really expand in its technology and its reach. The modern farmer, if we consider today, has to know so many different things about technology. He has to be able to, well, try and fix their tractors and other machinery when they can, before various proprietary technologies stop them being able to. Try and keep track of the weather, keep track of the crop prices, all those things. He's really at the beginning of that becoming a technological thing, not a we hope and we're planning and we're trying to, there's a lot more luck involved. It's at the point at which this is becoming a lot of tech involved. And he applies the experience from the Navy and he immediately goes to study. And he goes, let's see if we can't keep this peanut growing business going and try and expand it. And his first harvest is a complete failure due to drought. He has to open credit lines to keep everything going, which is where being able to talk like a naval officer and an engineer and a scientist and all those things probably helps going and talking to bank managers. More than likely. He then takes classes, studies agriculture. He signed Rosalind up to accounting qualifications and skills, and she seems to be quite happy to take them on. And they managed to grow their business. They managed to grow their peanut farm. And then there are issues. There are issues. 10 years, as time goes, as 10 years go on and they get more settled, their children get older, there start to be issues. First of all, in education. There's the whole issues of integration in America, in the civil rights movement. And, well, Carter was a member of the Sumter County School Board and a Baptist church member and in prominent standing, and starts to speak in favor of integration. After all, he'd served in the Navy. And the Navy had, broadly speaking, been integrating during his time in service. And this leads to him running for his Georgia State Senate seat. Literally, he runs for it because the person who he's running against, he doesn't trust. He doesn't trust him. And that's how his career goes on in politics. He gives speeches, he tries to develop things. He's trying to fight for, I would say, not necessarily always an ideological position, but usually a common sense position. Usually a let's get along and work together scenario most of the time. There are times he digs his heels in. There are times he does get ideological. But mostly he seems to be going for we're here to serve the public. We need to deliver something. We need to make sure things work. And he tries to stick close to the things he's passionate about. When he's in the when he's in the Georgia Senate and he's doing the things there, he tries to push for being involved in education, does get involved in education, becomes chair of the education committee. And is heavily involved in things like university funding, in education development. That's something he cares about. He cares about education because he knows how important it was to himself, his own ability to get ahead, and he knows how important it will be to others to get ahead. And education is useful. It opens doors. It's not a single silver bullet that solves all problems, and there is a scenario where you can push people down one route, because you can go, education's the only answer, so you have to go to university, you have to do those things. Speaking to you, lecturer, this might sound heresy, but that isn't the only solution for everyone. People have different desires and different aptitudes, and what the purpose of education is about giving them the opportunities to find where their aptitudes lie, should be, where their aptitudes lie, so they can then develop those aptitudes into something which can make the kind of life they want for themselves. And I realise that is idealism in me. I realise that is. But it also, to me, makes the most efficient sense, because if you're forcing square pegs into round holes, that's going to just damage and jam up the system. Whereas if you have the pegs being able to find the right holes for themselves, makes everything work a lot more smoothly. And you don't have to do as much effort. And that's pretty much how it carries on. He finds people who are conservative segregationists in the Democrat Party and runs against them, mostly. And this is the period where he's running up. It is a civil rights period, and there are people in the Democrat Party, as well as, who are deeply segregationist. And Carter would see them wanting to run and go, so who's going to oppose this person? No one? None of you? Okay, then I guess it's me. And now, the gubernatorial races are probably the hardest to justify in terms of Carter as a personality. They do become about winning to an extent. His first race, he sees Maddox win, and he was a segregationist who he ardently opposed based on those positions. And he wins, and Carter comes third in the primaries and all those things. In the second race, well, he's against a guy called Carl Sanders, who's richer by a large margin than Carter. And Carter ends up doing some flip-flopping, which frankly is quite intriguing. He accuses Sanders of being corrupt, but doesn't produce the evidence. He talks with both segregationists like George Wallace and Martin Luther King and others. He goes around everyone, basically, and he actually criticizes Sanders for so publicly taking a side in supporting Martin Luther King. This is despite his own support for civil rights and his own arguments against segregation, which had started out his career. What's interesting is that once he's elected, he immediately becomes very outspoken against the racist politics of Georgia. And to quote Leroy Johnson, who was a state senator, an American of African ethnic heritage, well, he actually said, I understand why Carter ran the kind of ultra-conservative campaign. I don't believe you can win this state without being a racist. It's kind of like it's a bitter pill. It's the necessary evil to get the job done. And then he begins his governorship. And he does quite well. He does quite well. Despite his campaign, despite all the people he's been pictured with during the election and all the things he's done, his inaugural speech, he says the time for racial discrimination is over. And I'd say that's a good policy he starts off with. He also does things like merging 300 state agencies into 22. Dispute over whether that saved money or not, but certainly saves in administration heads of department cost. He does a lot of interesting things whilst governor, and again, most of it's based on his reading of the evidence. Now I could carry on to his presidential career and all these things, but I think the point has been made, hopefully. This is a man who came out of the Navy with a desire to continue serving his country, but couldn't see a better solution to fixing the problem of who was going to run the peanut farm his father had left behind. Couldn't see any other option. It'd be one thing if it had collapsed under his father. It's a completely different thing for it to survive his father and then collapse under his leadership, his ownership. It's a completely different scenario for that to happen, isn't it? To let down his father that way. And then we have his involvement in politics. Again, this is why I would say, based on his track record, this is why I don't consider him necessarily an ideological politician. I consider him there is a problem here, it needs leadership, I'm passionate about my country and I want this solved. And no one else is stepping up and solving this. And he finds a way to solve the problems as best he can. Are they always the best solutions? Probably not, especially not in hindsight. But are they the best ones he can find? I'd argue so. With that being said, I'd like you to think about, and I always finish these videos with a question, and I'm going to finish this one with one. I'd like you to think about leaders from around the world who may have had a naval background or may not have had a naval background. How many in your experience do you think were there because they wanted the power? And how many were there because they believed they had the responsibility? And who do you think are good examples of both? Now, before this turns into a dumpster fire in my comment section, I will remind people, please be nice and respectful. I encourage debate. I do. But I'm a firm believer that you have lost your debate when your resort is to being rude about someone, insulting them, or calling them stupid or names or anything like that. I'm a firm believer that the moment you have to resort to insulting your opponent, you have lost the debate. And judge accordingly. That has always been my view. If my only retort is to be rude, then I have lost. And there is no point in carrying on. Because I no longer have arguments to make in good faith or good logic. And that is how I run my comment section. With that being said, what else have we got coming up? Andrew Cunningham, Master of Confusion. Oh, that's going to be a fun one. That's going to be probably a longer one. This was quite a short video on these understanders, but it's more of a... Yeah, I can either get really into the weeds on this one, which I don't really want to, because it's a lot of politics and a lot of policy decisions, or I could talk about it in the nice, broader terms, which allow us to discuss and debate things without personal experience hopefully becoming the bludgeon. So I picked that. But yeah, Master of Confusion, Andrew Cunningham, the guy who really does enact the naval Maskarvoka of the Mediterranean and other operations. Thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed, and take care. And if you liked the video, please do like, share and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. I know I should say this more often, but you know.